In this video, I'm going to talk about the Feast Deck in Pendragon. Pendragon, if you haven't heard, is a wonderful Arthurian fantasy RPG. It's a low magic system. It's a unique system. Does not feel like Dungeons and Dragons. It does not feel like other systems. And I absolutely love it. I have a ton of other videos of my solo Great Pendragon campaign. I'll link them. Check them out. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the Feast Deck. Why? Because feasts are awesome. One of the biggest, after playing Pendragon, one of the reasons I liked it so much is because it took a lot of time and effort into non-combat parts of the game. And I started realizing that games like Dungeons and Dragons or even Dungeon Crawl Classics don't spend nearly as much time and attention looking at non-combat part of the games. One of my favorite parts of Pendragon is the feasts, and the reason I like it so much is the Feast Deck. In the Feast Deck, essentially what you're doing is during feasts, you're going to take an action. There's a lot of mechanics in Pendragon around feasts, and one of the actions you can take is drawing a card from the Feast Deck. I'll put some up on the screen here as well. Essentially, the card has a few different parts to it. In the upper left, you're going to gain a resource or a number called geniality. This represents how good you are during the feast, I guess, how genial you are during the feast. But what it does is it allows you to do more things within the feast, and it acts as a modifier in certain situations. In addition to that, the Feast Deck is then going to have a title for the feast card. It'll explain to you what's happening in the game. So in this one, it's called People Skills. It says several landed knights talk of lands and serfs, and then ask your opinion. Then it gives you a skill check, and you roll a skill check. In this case, the skill check is folklore, and then it tells you what a success looks like, and what happens, what a critical success looks like, and what happens, and what a fumble looks like, and what happens. There's also some iconography on there to help you figure out what, at a glance, what the possible results of that particular feast card might be. Now, this is an absolutely wonderful thing within Pendragon because it makes feasts super dynamic and super exciting. There are other actions you can do during feasts, but in Pendragon during feasts, you can draw a card and it can represent something very, very small. It can be something not good. It can be something good for your character, or there are cards in this feast deck that represent once in a lifetime opportunities. Maybe the host is giving you an opportunity to give a toast at the feast. And if that goes well, maybe you get a really, really big reward. These are the types of things that can happen in feast decks, and I absolutely love it. They're very, very good to play solo as well. In fact, the Feast Deck is the reason why I like playing feasts solo, because it is a self-contained encounter on a single card. When I'm playing solo and and I'm in a feast, I always go to the Feast Deck because it's a full encounter, and you can very, very easily add it to the story, pull NPCs from the current year and put them as the NPCs for the feast card. It works very, very well. So if you haven't checked out feast cards for Pendragon, I highly suggest you do so. I have the links below if you want to check them out. Now, one thing that I want to say before I close this video out is I really wish other RPGs spent more time thinking about feasts and celebrations. So much fiction, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's fantasy, there are so many moments where there are feasts and celebrations where very important things happen. For example, in Firefly, Mal Reynolds gets challenged to a duel at a feast because one of the fancy people at the feast, who is a very good duelist, pisses him off, and then he accepts the duel and he ends up figuring it out in the end. But that is a full plot point in an episode that occurs at a feast. Yet in Traveler, at least in the core rulebook, there's really no mention of feasts. Now, Traveler is a perfect place where there could be a feast deck in Traveler because there's so many skills and there's less emphasis on combat in Traveler when compared to something like Dungeons and Dragons. Even so, I think Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeon Crawl Classics, or really any fantasy RPG, would be perfect for feasts. There's so many examples of feasts and celebrations in fantasy fiction. Look at Game of Thrones. Look at how many things happen during feasts and celebration in Game of Thrones. The Red Wedding, and I mean, that one I guess is combat-based, but there's so much of that occurs in feasts and celebrations. And Dungeons and Dragons, one of my biggest problems with it, I guess, which isn't really a problem. It's just a combat game. If you're not doing combat most of the time, there's very little support for your players in your game outside of that. But I still think there's an area for feasts. There are still skills that are used less often than others, and I think there's an opportunity, especially if you have fun magic items or you start treating contacts and allies and rivals like currency a little bit, like it is in Traveler. You can have a really, really fun feast deck. So game designers out there, start designing feasts and feast decks for these other games. And if there are feasts and feast decks for these other games that I'm unaware of, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Anyways, those are my quick thoughts on the Pendragon Feast Deck. I hope you liked them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.